All right, good evening. My name is Krista Dilaba, and I am the director of the Morpho Institute, and I want to welcome all of you to our 2020 webinar series. We're designing these webinars to engage our alumni and friends of the Educator Academy and of the Amazon to address Amazon conservation through education. So our goal for this is to provide really rich rainforest content and updates, and then have follow-up conversations that will allow us to make stronger connections to the curriculum. So tonight I am super excited to have Ellie Benson with us. Some of us know her as Elizabeth, some of us know her as Liz, but I'm pretty sure that most everybody here has met Ellie. As you know, or if you don't know, she's with the organization, the nonprofit and NGO OnePlanet. And OnePlanet has been a really wonderful partner of ours for the last 4 years and have helped us create educational ecotourism programs and workshops in partnership and in collaboration with the Maijuna. And OnePlanet was founded by Dr. Mike Gilmore, who is a professor at George Mason University, and he spent the better part of 20 years working with the Maijuna and is still a major force in helping them achieve their conservation goals. So Liz, we were fortunate to get introduced to Liz right at the beginning of this partnership, and she has facilitated every single one of our Educator Academies since. And also our inquiry, conservation, and sustainability field programs as well. So Liz started working with the Maijuna in 2018, and she's really been focusing on the research and development of the Maijuna stingless beekeeping project. She's also certainly been involved in our ecotourism projects, as well as the mammal conservation projects that have been going on with Brian Griffiths and Dr. Mark Bowler. So she's just an amazing young woman, and we have just been delighted to have the chance to work with her. So I am going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to share her screen, and she's going to take off and give us an overview of what's been going on with the Maijuna and the conservation project, and then an update on where we stand with COVID-19 in the Maijuna communities. So off you go, Liz.
Well, thank you so much, Krista. That was quite an introduction. So I'll just jump right back into it. And feel free to ask, any questions as they come up. But I'm gonna start with just a quick review of some of the Maijuna's background and conservation story. And that's just if anybody needs a bit of a refresher, as well as if anybody has family who's listening that haven't yet met the Maijuna. So the Maijuna are an indigenous group living in the Peruvian Amazon, and there are about 400 Maijuna living on their ancestral lands. Many of you have met them. And as Krista said, OnePlanet is a nonprofit in both the United States and Peru that primarily focuses on traditional and indigenous community and biocultural conservation. And as Krista said as well, OnePlanet's founder, Dr. Michael Gilmore, has built relationships with the Maijuna and has worked with them for the last 20 years. And so through this organization's collaboration and that trust that we have with the Maijuna communities, we're able to work on economic development as well as research and education that fuel one another. And really the heart of our work with the Maijuna is toward this common goal of biocultural conservation. And so that's the idea that the Maijuna's culture cannot be sustained without their Maijuna land and the ecosystems therein. And likewise, the land can't be sustained or conserved without the Maijuna people. And just to orient ourselves, once again, we're talking about the Maijuna's ancestral lands up in the northeastern portion of Peru. I've got it kind of circled in purple, almost to the border of Colombia. And then on this zoomed in map, I think you can see my mouse on the screen. This is, in this area, in the lower portion, is where Iquitos would be. And then for those of you who went to the Explorama Napo Lodge, that is right about here at the base of this Sukusari River. And then this green area shows the Maijuna's ancestral lands. And those ancestral lands were annotated by the government for many, many years only as abandoned land, that there was no claim to them, no ownership, and no one living there. And the Maijuna's conservation story is, of course, way too long for just one webinar, but to start somewhere, this annotation as abandoned land, it allowed loggers to freely enter the Maijuna lands using those rivers on the map that we saw to access deep into the forest and do extensive, very extensive logging. And so that logging and poaching and overfishing that started in real earnest in the early 2000s really quickly devastated the Maijuna's ancestral home. And in a very short period of time, it left them without fish, without game, and without the forest resources that they used to nourish their families, build their homes. And this land, we have the beautiful overview, bird's eye view shot of some of it. It's some of the most biodiverse, intact rainforests in the Amazon, as well as some of the most dense carbon sink forest in the Amazon. And so in the early 2000s, the Maijuna decided to organize with the help from allies, including OnePlanet's founder, Michael Gilmore, to be able to conserve their culture, their environment, improve their community organization, as well as the health and education of the Maijuna. And so they formed a federation uniting the four bases, the four Maijuna communities in their ancestral lands under the federation abbreviated as Fikonamai. To support their claim that what was this kind of empty expanse on a map, it was actually their homeland. They teamed up with various allies to take a rapid biological and cultural inventory, which now we're seeing here. And it shows that this land is just full of historically and culturally important sites, as well as sites that are contemporarily important, places that are important for the Maijuna's hunting and fishing and gathering of forest products. And so after about 10 years of lobbying, of working with various allies, including OnePlanet, Nature and Culture International, the Chicago Field Museum, among others, they established the Maijuna Quichua Regional Conservation Area, which all of you have visited. And that does span about 1 million acres, and their ancestral lands, this green portion we're seeing on the map. And of course, the four primary Maijuna communities in their ancestral lands I've got circled in red here. Once the Maijuna had control of their ancestral lands, they were finally able to manage them themselves. And they wanted to restore the mammal populations that had been so devastated by the poaching and by the logging. Because of course they're an important source of game, important for maintaining the forest's health, and really important features of the Maijuna culture. And so the Maijuna, OnePlanet, as well as other partners such as San Diego Zoo Global, have been documenting the recovery of mammal populations on their lands in this indigenous managed forest. And so the map that we see on the far right side, it's not covered up by all the lovely zoom faces, is the Sukusari River Basin. And at the very bottom, there's a black dot that indicates where the Explorama Lodge is. And then it extends up about 20 miles or so into the Sugusari River Basin and a corner of the regional conservation area. And so that work partnered with the Maijuna has been to document the movement of those animals, as well as to capture their recovery throughout the river basin. We've worked with the Maijuna to understand their hunting practices and the sustainable use of their lands and the mammals. For example, this new map that we see populated with green dots or purple dots show the different paths and hunting patterns of different Maijuna hunters to help scientists, as well as the government, as well as the Maijuna themselves, and hopefully other people with potentially indigenous managed land, understand how hunting can be continued and can continue to be a rich part of the culture and subsistence while keeping rich biodiversity in these really critical rainforests. And then a piece of the hunting and mammal conservation that I think you guys saw was the work of a PhD student, Brian Griffiths, at George Mason University. And as you may remember, Brian and the Maijuna were studying mineral licks, or in Spanish, they're known as colpas, which are sites in the forest where mammals consume clay and minerals for their nutrients, as well as the detoxifying effects of the clay. And so those sites, because so many mammals are going there to eat this soil, so because mammals are going there to eat the soil, hunters also go there, of course, and they're very important sites in Maijuna culture, as well as just in Maijuna day-to-day life, because they're so critical for Maijuna hunting. And so Brian and the Maijuna used a variety of methods, from interviews to setting camera traps in mineral licks, to studying hunter decision-making and mapping their routes to try to get a better handle on these mineral licks, how mammals use them, how hunters use them, and how they could potentially be an important piece of ensuring the Maijuna's conservation of their lands, and more broadly than the Maijuna, how throughout the Amazon they might be an important piece of conservation. And I think a lot of you visited these mineral licks and set camera traps. And so the partnership with the Morpho Institute and Explorama as well has helped expand that research and understanding, so that because of course the work of tourism, the recovery of tourism, as well as the recovery of mammals in the area are all interlinked. And if you're interested in what came of those, all the data coming from those muddy spots in the forest, you can keep up with Brian Griffiths, who is currently publishing the results from that data. Most recently, he and Mark Bowler and Michael Gilmore published a paper on an instance where they saw an ocelot pictured in this upper right-hand corner hunting a porcupine at a mineral lick, which was very exciting. And so definitely keep, if you're interested, keep in touch to see what we're learning. So, oops. Although the Maijuna's ancestral lands are recognized as and protected as a regional conservation area, there are still threats, such as the planned mega development project, which is a road indicated by this very thick line that just bisects the Maijuna's ancestral lands. And it's a road that would connect Iquitos to Colombia, but it would devastate the rainforest and the Maijuna's livelihoods. And so we have been working with the Maijuna to keep them informed, facilitate their activism surrounding the road and their opposition to the road. We've been working with them to get alternative means of getting their voices heard when other channels fail them, as well as we've been working to connect them to other allies for this fight against the road. And so this biocultural conservation story, you know, it has the piece of gaining and maintaining recognition and control over their ancestral lands, as well as the piece of leveraging their biological and cultural resources, because you know, their goal is to live on their land. They need to earn a living, support their families, and do it sustainably. And you know, when we ask the Maijuna, okay, what is this? Sustainably is a nice word. What does it mean? You know, and they say that you know, they want to live in a way so that their children and future generations will be able to still live that way and enjoy their ancestral home. You know, and the Maijuna saw the destruction that the logging and poaching caused in their home, and so they are partnering with OnePlanet as well as the Morpho Institute to find alternatives, you know, that are relevant to their culture. And so, as you guys know, there are a number of these projects, but I thought I would just try to bring you up to speed on a couple that you might be most familiar with. And those are the stingless beekeeping as well as the educational tourism that you all took part in. And so, as you may remember, the stingless beekeeping was conceived as an innovation of these bees, a natural resource that naturally occur on the Maijuna's lands. So the Maijuna already used the stingless bee honey, and we're already familiar with the vast diversity of species living in their forests. And so OnePlanet, as well as La Restinga, have been working with the Maijuna to help them learn how to raise the bees and sustainably harvest their honey for a highly sought after and high quality product that can be harvested and sold sustainably. And so they're learning the beekeeping techniques and selling the honey, which is empowering women. It's strengthening families' incomes and livelihoods. We've been working with them to organize a business model that works for the realities in the community and for the available markets. And we've been working to realize the stingless beekeeping's full potential as a means to celebrate the Maihiki language, as well as Maijuna traditional knowledge. And we've been working with the Maijuna to maximize the sustainability and the scalability of this activity, as well as in the husbandry of novel species. And so, depending on when you visited, you may be more up to date on how this project has been advancing. But it started 4 years ago in Sukusari, which was kind of the pilot for this activity in Maijuna lands. And about a year and a half ago, we expanded to 2 more Maijuna communities further up the Napo River in Nueva Vida and Puerto Limon. And because the proof of concept in Sukusari went really well, and these communities were requesting it too. They'd seen the beekeeping and were really excited to have it in their communities as well. And so this last year, we have been working with over 50 families to training the stingless beekeeping and harvesting. And in 2019, it was the first year of really piloting the harvest. And it was really exciting. In 2019 alone, the Maijuna earned over $2,500 US in sales of honey, which was very exciting for their first year of honey sales, and we're expecting it to only strengthen. And of course, the beekeeping is an activity that a number of you have learned about through their educational tourism. And the educational tourism was another option that the Maijuna sought as an alternative to the commercial extraction of their natural resources. And so the Maijuna, along with Morpho Institute and OnePlanet, worked to develop these educational activities to focus on the Maijuna's traditional knowledge, their cultural practices, as well as their sustainability efforts. And most of you have been able to participate in a number of these activities that celebrate the Maijuna's knowledge, their culture, and they're really conceived as activities that will be able to adapt and evolve along with the Maijuna communities and along with their conservation story, and in a way that rightly acknowledges their position as experts in these fields. And I can talk about some of what that has achieved for the Maijuna in this few years that we've been doing educational tourism together. But I don't think I can say it any better than Sebastián Rios Ochoa, who is one of the Maijuna leaders, also known as Matanque in Mahiki. And in, I think, last June in 2019, Sebastián reflected on these activities, and he said, through educational tourism, we can support our children, and we can do it without cutting a single tree or killing animals. We see the animal populations are now increasing, so they will be more than enough in the future. Now we only hunt to eat and not to sell commercially, and more of this tourism would increase the quality of life here. And so we're seeing really exciting developments in the Maijuna's capacity to receive groups such as the ones that Morpho Institute brings, as well as a couple other university groups, and to have those rich cross-cultural experiences so that they can effectively share just their vast knowledge and their home. And perhaps some of you, I think, were with myself and with Krista and with Morpho Institute in March when we saw the new inauguration of the Maijuna Cultural Interpretation Center in Sukusari. And so that was the large thatch-roofed building where, you know, the Maijuna bring tour groups, educational groups to show, to give some of the background of their culture and conservation story. And when I say it was recently inaugurated, it was redesigned with the Maijuna. And so we worked with the Maijuna as well as with Explorama and Morpho Institute to develop the educational materials in the center to better help the Maijuna tell their story to visitors. And so I believe on March 15th of 2020, we opened the Maijuna rather opened the Cultural Interpretation Center with these new materials. We had a really lovely celebration and a feast, and it was very exciting for me to see so many more members of the community excited by the materials and excited about becoming guides to share the information, share the center, and share their communities with visitors. And at the same time, in March, I think the 15th as well, several hundred Maijuna convened for their annual conference. And one of the Morpho Institute's groups got to see part of that conference in action. And one of the things that the Maijuna did at this conference was coordinate some of their advocacy and activism surrounding the road development. And so that was very energizing and very critical. And then, as you may know, 2 days later, the first coronavirus case was confirmed in Iquitos. And so that has very much changed the scene in Maijuna lands. And so now we have to reconsider, and the Maijuna are reconsidering what survival and what biocultural conservation look like during a pandemic. Of course, tourism has absolutely ground to a stop. And so these sharing activities, bringing people into the community and selling their arts to visitors has absolutely stopped, and that has certainly affected their economy. But beyond that, I believe on March 19th, Peru put in place a mandatory quarantine and a mandatory lockdown, which also limited the Maijuna's access to the markets where they sell their agricultural goods, sell game, and access some essential goods. The virus has also disrupted education, and it very quickly became clear that this was an enormous threat to the Maijuna's culture as well as livelihoods. And the nearest hospitals for the Maijuna are in Iquitos, and the health system in Iquitos was very quickly overwhelmed. The doctors were overwhelmed. They didn't have capacity to effectively quarantine patients, and they had very limited access to oxygen. And so throughout the region, the best case for everybody was to shelter in place. But as I'll get into a little bit more, even the Maijuna who can subsist off their land, everybody still needs to go to market for some essentials. And so the government did some early efforts to get supplies to rural communities so that they could shelter in place. But unfortunately, there weren't health and safety measures in place, or health and safety protocols in place. And they ended up spreading the virus further and really delivering it to indigenous communities' doorsteps. Another aspect of what is affecting the Maijuna, as well as communities throughout Peru, is that people living in the cities, including Maijuna who live in the cities, lost their jobs, and really didn't have a safety net. And so they ended up and continue to flee the cities to their farms, to their parents who still live on farms, to their homes and ancestral lands in rural areas. But of course that risks taking the virus with them. And then of course, on top of that, there's just the sobering threat that while lives and families and futures are at risk, the Maijuna elders, as well as all indigenous elders, are the keepers of cultural memory, and of course they're who are most at risk. And meanwhile, there is very limited ability to get them any medical or otherwise primary need relief. And this is all true for the Maijuna. And so it was really apparent that their most immediate need was to shelter in place. So we were immediately in touch with Maijuna leaders as quickly as possible. And they understood and were very ready, but they were also very frank that of course, we would like to shelter in place, but at the end of the day, there are things that we need from markets to be able to live off our farms and live off our forests and rivers. And so we worked with the community leaders to identify who all was in the community and the basics for what they need to shelter in place. And just some of those basics are, we're talking about things like fishing line, fishing hooks, basic medicines, flashlights for hunting, soap, toothpaste, salt, you know. And so while there is so much that they can get from the lands that they're sustainably managing, there are still needs that they would have to risk leaving their communities to procure. And so the community leaders were very excellent in organizing their communities, in closing down their river basins as much as possible. So not letting outsiders in, as well as discouraging from community members from leaving the communities. And meanwhile, we worked up a list and had the Maijuna approve it of these things that are so essential, and that with them, the Maijuna could conceivably shelter in place. And so what we're talking about is, so we have the Maijuna living in these 4 communities in their ancestral lands, and there are about 400 between the 4 communities. But then we also have about another 200 living in these 3 larger cities: San Antonio del Estrecho on the border with Colombia, Iquitos, and then Masan, which is kind of between Iquitos and the communities along the Napo. So we had 400 in their ancestral lands, as well as 200 in the cities. And as critical as it was and is for the Maijuna in their ancestral lands to shelter in place, it's also very critical for the people in the city to be able to safely shelter in place, so that they aren't forced to return and risk bringing the virus with them. And so with support from a team, kind of a skeleton crew on the ground, and then the Maijuna community leaders, we were able to get a register, essentially, of all these Maijuna and where they were, you know, because normally people, of course, move around and they were caught not necessarily in their homes. And so to figure out where people were, what they would need, and ultimately what we would be able to support them with. Because as we're trying to organize this relief, the pandemic was just erupting. And so these yellow circles indicate where there are already lots of confirmed cases in the outbreak. So it started in Iquitos, where you saw at the primary hospital and hospitals in the whole region were devastated, and then spread out from there, from Masan to river communities, Santa Clotilde, and then the border with Colombia. So it is just all around the Maijuna's land, and any of the markets that they would normally go to were sites of contamination. Just to give you an idea, there are a couple primary markets in Iquitos. Some of you may have even visited the market of Belén. And so that's one of the places that farmers and hunters and fishermen from river communities go to sell their products. And of course, where people in the city go to buy their food, usually for the day or the next day. And so in the market of Belén, they tested every seller, and 100% of them were infected with COVID. And just to give you an idea of how devastating the outbreak has been in Iquitos and the surrounding area. And so as we're trying to figure out the logistics of supporting the Maijuna, we're also trying to figure out what can we get there and what can we not? You know, can we get oxygen to them? Can we get cartridges so that they can hunt, and fishing hooks as well as food? Because as you can imagine, the supply chain is changing, what has been changing kind of by the day. If you remember, Iquitos and this whole region, it's not connected to the rest of Peru or anywhere else by road. It's all by plane and barge along the rivers. And those routes were very heavily affected by the virus. So, but finally, health protocols came out and we were able to follow them, able to coordinate with the Maijuna, and we are currently getting supplies to them. Like I said, we're getting salt, soap, lighters, toothbrushes, toothpaste, you know, some oil and rice, and just the basics so that they can shelter in place out to the communities. And we also have been able to bring them informational materials, because if you may remember, there's no cell service out there, there's very little radio. And so they have very limited opportunities to get information about the virus, about how to be safe and protect themselves, and what to do in the case of suspicious cases. And so we got a team out to the communities along the Napo. We've gotten help to 200 Maijuna living in Iquitos, Masan, and Estrecho. And so far, the communities have not experienced COVID, thankfully. So far, they've continued to shelter in place as much as possible. And when the delivery to the northern portion of the Maijuna lands is complete, we'll be then working with the Maijuna to figure out, okay, what is the next step? So hopefully they'll be able to shelter in place now for a few months, which essentially hopefully buys us a little bit of time to be able to figure out what needs to happen next. And of course we have to do that, you know, with them and with all of our partners, as we always do, with Explorama, with the Morpho Institute, with La Restinga, to, you know, make the plan, the execution, and the relief, you know, and the future just as strong as possible. And so far this operation has been supported by the Grant Circle Foundation and by a generous donation. And so looking ahead, we'll be re-envisioning, you know, as everyone is going to have to do, re-envisioning what biocultural conservation is going to look like, what research is going to look like, what healthcare is going to look like in Maijuna lands, as well as tourism, of course. And so we'll be doing that in the coming weeks and months. And, you know, there are some things that we know will be a part of our future, but a lot of it will be, you know, putting all the partners' heads together and trying to re-envision and reimagine, you know, what makes sense for the Maijuna's conservation story moving forward. So that is just kind of a brief update about some of the Maijuna's conservation projects up until March, and then coming into how COVID has been affecting them. And just really quickly, for myself, I was in Maijuna lands through March, and I was in the Sikusari community when Peru went into lockdown, and I was there for a couple weeks. And then OnePlanet decided to fall into line with the majority of other businesses as well as nonprofits with international personnel, and coordinated with the U.S. Embassy in Peru to bring me back to the U.S. So although I have a lovely background of the Sukusari River, I am currently in Indiana. But
well, Ellie, thank you so much. Just keep it on this slide for a minute. I know that there's going to be lots of questions, and I'd like to address those before we just take a little bit of time to talk about some exciting new curriculum stuff that we've put together with the help of Ava, and some possibilities moving into the future. I also, just real quickly, I know Stephen's on the line. Stephen Foldy, who was with us last year for the Educator Academy, he and his students made a substantial donation to OnePlanet, and Ellie dipped into his classroom for a little bit to do a similar sort of presentation. They had anticipated going to the Amazon right about now, and that obviously did not happen. So we're grateful that they put some money towards the COVID relief fund. So questions for Liz. It's a small group online. If you want to unmute and ask, go for it, or shoot the questions over in the chat.
I'm always ready to start with questions. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear an update. I've been worrying about everyone. I'm also worried. I've been seeing, and I don't know how close this is, I've been seeing reports of oil spills in Ecuador polluting the Napo. Do you have any idea if that's hitting all the way down the Sukusari communities?
so far, we have not heard reports from those communities of it affecting them, but it is right up the Napo River, right in the Napo headwaters, and so we are absolutely, unfortunately, anticipating that it will, affect the communities, because, at the very, very least, the fish populations are, part of a continuous river system. And so it is very unlikely that they're going to escape being affected by that really devastating oil spill that happened in Ecuador. Also mid-March, I believe. So not yet, but it doesn't look good.
Hey, hello, this is Pat O'Connor. I just had a question about the education, and thank you guys for doing all this. This is amazing, great. And just how education is affected by the shut off of, do you bring teachers in from outside? Do teachers go into Iquitos for training or supplies, or how is that part affected?
So as a part of Peru's mandatory quarantine, they closed all schools, including all schools in the communities. And many of the teachers who are Maijuna and who work in the community schools also have homes in Iquitos. And so some were not in the communities at the time of quarantine, or have left. But at the end of the day, the government so far has closed all schools. And so that, and of course, there is no option for online education or childcare, that kind of thing at home. And we're not sure how long that will go. Peru has a rollout plan, but it is executed differently in the different states according to the severity of the outbreak there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, so it's basically the parents are also educating their own children, hopefully
Yes.
academically, but if not, then in their culture and in their way of life and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and school had just gotten rolling because of the way their school schedule They're off from November to February, so they had barely been in school a month before everything shut down. And I'll try to get some more information on that topic. That's a great question, Pat. And also, Amanda, we'll try to expand our vision a little bit here and stay up to date on what's going on with the oil spill as well. So any other questions? Now's a great opportunity to tap Ellie for her expertise. We can certainly, shoot follow-up questions, but please feel free to jump in here.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question.
Go for it.
Okay, thanks. Actually, Amanda asked it on the chat, but I have the same question. What do we know about the folks with Explorama, especially at the Explorer Napo Lodge, the guides, the workers, Pam, all those folks? How are they doing?
Sure, I can address that. Liz, I don't know how much contact you've had with Pam. Basically, Rob was with me, and Amanda and Mike were with me, and Kelly Keena in the Amazon, and we left as the border was closing. Pam was in the process of shutting down the lodges right behind us, literally. Within less than a week of that time, all the employees were furloughed. And part of that was a strategic decision because of how pensions are distributed and unemployment, which I can't address with a lot of clarity because it's not my system, so I don't know it well. But basically, there's skeleton crews out at the lodges just for security purposes. Everybody else has either gone back to their home villages or they're in Iquitos. We have lost one guide, Ricardo, who has not facilitated any of the Educator Academy programs or the Inquiry, Conservation, and Sustainability programs, but you would know him from his very large and wonderful personality. And his life was lost, I think, within the first 3 weeks of the outbreak. Raul, who many of you know, who has always facilitated our Educator Academy program, he lost 4 brothers within the span of 48 hours. There have been 2 or 3 other employees from the lodges and from the central office that have passed because of COVID as well. Two gentlemen that worked in housekeeping, one at Sabatop's and one at the Jungle House, and then another gentleman that worked in the main office that was responsible for acquisitions and stock and inventories. And that's what I know about. I know that from what Pam has told me, there, this fingers out into extended family of all of these different employees. But basically, Explorama employs about 140 individuals. And unfortunately, they were identified as sort of ground zero for COVID in Iquitos. One of the Explorama employees was the first identified case. So within Iquitos, that's been a rough ride, I think, for Explorama, just having that bit of notoriety. I do keep in fairly good contact with Pam. At this point, everything is still closed. Iquitos, I believe, has just started to ease their restrictions on getting out in public and along with the social distancing and all of that. But they were under lockdown for nearly 100 days, severe lockdown. So no word yet on when Peru is going to open its borders, and no word yet on what Explorama is thinking about how they will reopen, what they will reopen, and when that will happen. Through the generosity of a very small group of people, and by small, I mean members of our Morpho community, we have about 200 people in our alumni network. And we raised $16,000 in little less than 4 weeks, just through individual donations, small and big. And so all of those funds have been distributed down to the Amazon, and Pam has distributed that equitably among all the employees. So everyone got a small little relief package. $16,000 doesn't go very far when you're dividing it over 140 families, but it was a little bit of help, which was very gratefully received. So for those of you that contributed, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It made a real and tangible difference, and it certainly helped Nancy, Kelly, and I feel like we could actually do something to be helpful on the ground.
Thank you, Krista. That was really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is hard to figure out how to communicate all of this stuff. Social media can be so easy, but not everybody's on social media, and everything gets lost in emails. So it's tricky. So never hesitate to reach out to me or Nancy or Kelly for information if you've got questions. We're more than happy to engage via phone or email. So happy to do that. All right.
Yeah, I have one more quick question if there's time.
Sure, go for it.
Ellie, thank you for the presentation. I'm sure that was really a tough one to give. But I just want to echo Herb's question in the comments. What is the timeline on the road right now?
So right now, there hasn't been any further development on the road. As of March, they were about 2 years out from the road connecting to the road segment that connects from Iquitos to Masan. So about 3 years out, perhaps, from starting the road that would potentially bisect the Maijuna's ancestral lands. And so with a few of the allies that OnePlanet and the Maijuna have been able to coordinate with on the prospects of halting and hopefully rerouting that road development, we were hopeful, very hopeful in the potential to do that in the coming year or so. But right now it is up in the air, and that is something else that we are working on with a couple other allies in Peru, is to be sure that to do as much as we can to keep the government accountable, because while the community is very limited in the organizing and activism and just movement and knocking on doors that they can do due to the pandemic, we really want to make sure that no one is taking advantage of that. That said, right now, many branches of the government, as well as lots of businesses, are devastated financially as well as just structurally by the pandemic. Because as you heard, there's been just really massive loss of life, as well as just illness and continued illness. But that is something that our team on the ground, as well as a few other allies, are working to stay on top of, and to not let that slip away just during the pandemic.
Thank you.
Ellie, Herb was asking, was the decision to cross the Maijuna land made before the designation or after?
Both.
Okay.
So the route was kind of first officially conceived in the early 2000s, before the creation of the regional conservation area. That said, the regional conservation area was officially recognized in 2015, and since then, the government as well as development agencies have continued moving forward with plans to build the road, and so unfortunately, the establishment of the regional conservation area has not afforded the protections that it should.
Herb is wondering about that too, and without going into too deep of a dive, he's wondering, how is this done without the permission of the community? And I don't know, Ellie, if you can talk about just a little bit about prior consultation, there is a law in the books, but it's a paper law at this point, right?
Yes, it is a law that has had very inconsistent enforcement, and the law we're referring to is prior consultation, and it's essentially a law that is supposed to have any development project or infrastructure project that would impact Indigenous communities pass the requirement of first consulting with the Indigenous communities to mediate those impacts. And unfortunately, it has been very variable, quite variable in its execution. Sometimes it is not executed at all. Sometimes it is not an opportunity for communities to reject a proposal. Instead, they're only able to negotiate for options to diminish the scope of a project or diminish the impact. And so far, regarding the road, none of the Maijuna communities have been consulted. And so OnePlanet and the Maijuna have linked up with a nonprofit in Peru called that is providing legal expertise as to the legal, judicial, and as well as just executive and administrative avenues that the Maijuna have for fighting the road, because it's not just through this prior consultation law. There are a number of different options that they can pursue. And so thankfully, we are now teamed up with some legal experts who should be able to help us get the Maijuna's voice heard and their vision realized, which is for this road not to happen.
That's awesome. Great questions, everybody. We are just about at 8 o'clock. So let's, if you've got questions, go ahead and put in the chat. But Ellie, if you'll just fast forward to the next slide. I just want to briefly touch on where we are headed from this situation. So obviously it's very clear that the Morpho Institute is partnering with OnePlanet to really work on community-based conservation and community-based education, and really try to conceptualize this idea of educational ecotourism. Obviously, COVID has put a damper on our plans as well. We will not be back in the Amazon this summer, and we're hopeful that we will be back in 2021, and are assuming that we will be. But Nancy Kelly and I started this Morpho Institute with the idea that we wanted to use the power of education, we're all educators, to foment conservation. And we are still working to define what that looks like and what that will be and what that can be. And like most of us, COVID has caused us to step back and reevaluate and think through things. So we are in the process with help from alumni. We cannot do this ourselves. We just don't have the bandwidth, but with some excellent help from alumni, and the door is wide open for anybody who wants to jump in on this. We have launched 2 big initiatives, and they're posted on the website, and I will send everybody links to all of this, as well as a link to the recording. So we've developed the sustainability and conservation resource guides, and these are all rooted in the Maijuna conservation story. And so Nancy Troutman did the heavy lifting on the sustainability and conservation resource guides, and those are all available as free downloads, PDFs for you all to use, and then for any teachers that maybe will never have the opportunity to go to the Amazon. So those are available. And then Ava Goodale, and I don't know, Ava, hopefully you're still there and can pop in here. Ava is working on a series of interrupted case studies for us, and these are deeply, deeply rooted in the Maijuna story, well-researched, well-cited, well-referenced, and she's piloted these with her students. So we have 2 of them that have been posted as of yesterday to the website. So there's an interrupted case study on Maijuna beekeeping and an interrupted case study on the aguaje palm fruit harvesting. So Ava, are you there?
I am. I'm from my phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, nice.
So first off, thank you, Ava. I'm excited to have everybody have a look at these. I've shared them with some of the team that's in the Amazon with us in March the last couple of years, and everyone's excited about them, and I think the larger audience will be as well. So Ava, do you want to say anything just briefly about those?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's actually hearing the conversation tonight. I think it's, you know, a new opportunity to continue with what we were doing, but now in a digital way, and to continue like engaging students in the Maijuna story. But yeah, so I just started with these two for no particular reason. And you know, we've all put together a laundry list of case study topics we could continue developing. But the hope is really to get, you know, share them as broadly as possible with teachers and their students as we're in remote learning and hybrid learning and everything that will be coming our way. And I'm definitely, there's still, you know, work in progress, even these two, and can definitely, you know, use the collaboration of people as they read them or use them with their students. So they're definitely, you know, live documents right now.
Yeah, so it's a terrific opportunity, and so one of the things that the main thing we're focusing on right now is the Maijuna conservation story. That we are not limited to that, however, but that's for another day. The Maijuna conservation story, on the other hand, is something that for us as the Morpho Institute has allowed us to really start putting our vision and our mission into real tangible action. And when we say, oh, you know, we promote Amazon conservation through education, well, we're not actually down there doing the educating, but we're providing opportunities for educators to participate and learn and gain knowledge in the field. But then we also want to be able to share this conservation story, which is a positive one, which we all need that these days, to a much broader audience. And we definitely need to figure out how to bring that full circle so that even if students and teachers are not traveling to the Amazon to have an interaction with the Maijuna, because at this point, we may decide in 2021 that's not safe for anybody to go back into those communities. So how do we go about telling this story, sharing this story, and having it support their conservation work in a direct and tangible way? So to that end, what we hope to do with these webinars, and we've set aside the fourth Thursday of every month for a webinar with faculty expertise and teacher leader expertise. So I'm going to be sending out an announcement about all that shortly. What we'd like to do is offer a follow-up conversation via Zoom with people that are interested in digging deeper into developing related curriculum to the topic at hand. So tonight we had this lovely overview and reminder from Liz about the Maijuna conservation story and COVID, and we're going to share the resources with you that Ava and Nancy have put together. So I would like to propose that next Tuesday evening, for anybody who's interested, we can reconvene and have a smaller group conversation about what we could do with this, do some more brainstorming, continue to build that list out of case studies or other curriculum that could be developed. Right now, this is very middle school, high school centric, and we certainly do not want to exclude the K6 crowd and the middle school crowd. So I'm going to throw that Zoom link out for a conversation next Tuesday night for anybody who's available that would be interested in doing that. Oh, good point. Amanda's asking about the University of Buffalo case study collection. That'd be awesome. Yeah, that'd be a great way to get it out. Any other questions? I'm going to scroll through the questions here real quick, and then we'll let you all go. Francis asked, Liz, I don't know if you can take this one. How does OnePlanet communicate with Sebastian and the people of Sukasari about COVID-19 through intermediary organization in Iquitos or direct phone communications?
So right now, the last few months we've been communicating with them via our OnePlanet reps who are in Iquitos, who the Maijuna can call from the river. So for example, the Maijuna in Sugusari, primarily we've been in touch with the community leader Everest, as well as his brother Douglas, who almost once a week will drive their boats out kind of into the middle of the Napo River, about an hour outside of their community, where they're able to make phone calls. And they're able to call their families in Lima, as well as to call us to coordinate and to communicate the situation in the communities. So that's primarily how we've been communicating with the different communities along the Napo.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you. Any last questions? Otherwise, we'll sign off for tonight. I have been recording this whole time, and I'll try to save the chat too. Haven't figured out how to do that yet, but I'll try.